Hey, folks. Today we're going to read The Wife of Bath's Tale by Geoffrey Chaucer. It's part of the Canterbury Tales. We met the Wife of Bath in the prologue. If you recall, she was a bold, attractive, older woman who had traveled the world and had had 5 husbands and considered herself to be an expert on love. And so she's going to be the narrator who's telling the story, and the story is going to be from her perspective. We're going to look at this textbook version here, and I will try and give you a little bit more. They cut off a bit of the Wife of Bath's prologue that I think is important. Remember that between every one of these Canterbury Tales stories, we return to the overall frame narrative, right? This is the frame story. The frame is that there's 30 pilgrims all on their way to Canterbury, and they've created a storytelling contest where they're each going to tell 2 stories on the way there and 2 stories on the way back. And whoever tells the best story wins a free feast. This is going to be one of the entries told by the Wife of Bath. So we're starting out actually in the frame narrative where the Wife of Bath sort of has her own prologue to the story, where instead of telling a tale, she's just talking in her own voice. And she actually is talking to the pardoner, which is great because we just read the pardoner's tale before this. So you know who that character is and what he's all about. Anyway, the textbook I found online is a Florida textbook for this one, and it's got some useful information. So let's start here. Connect to your life, love and marriage. You are probably familiar with the phrase, the battle of the sexes. This expression suggests that romantic relationships have an aspect of conflict, in which one party attempts to gain the upper hand. What are your own opinions on the subject? Would you say that a good marriage is basically an equal partnership, or do you think that one person needs to be the decision maker? Explain your options in a class discussion. We're not going to have a class discussion here, but it's something to think about as you move into this story. And the reason is that the Wife of Bath as a character has very clear ideas on marriage. Remember, she's been married 5 times and she considers herself to be an expert on love. And her story is going to relate her philosophy of love and relationships. Now, what's interesting about her story as we get into it is you'll find that it's a medieval romance. We read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, so we're familiar with medieval romance. But as opposed to a true medieval romance like the story the Knight tells, I haven't read that one with you. It's one of the longer ones. I'll probably do a lecture where I summarize it for you. But as opposed to the Knight's Tale, which is a true romance, the Wife of Bath's tale is a satire of romance. Remember that satire is when you make fun of something, exaggerate its flaws to make it look ridiculous in an attempt to cause people to generate change. And I think what Chaucer's doing is very much like what Scary Movie did. Scary Movie, if you've ever watched that horrible movie, makes fun of horror movies. It says, hey, there are problems with this genre. Why is it, for example, that whenever the busty co-ed is at home by herself and somebody knocks on her door, she goes and answers the door? Why should she do that? Why do these jump scares always happen in these very predictable ways? And so after watching and laughing through the entire show, you think, well, maybe we need to change the way we do our literature. And I think that's what Geoffrey Chaucer's doing a little bit here. He's poking fun at King Arthur and King Arthur stories and the idea of forbidden love and, all of that by sort of changing the terms of it on us and changing the characters and sort of turning it all upside down on its head. And we'll see that as we go through, and I'll comment on it. And maybe partially that's because it's got a female narrator. And what's interesting about the Wife of Bath is she seems to have a more pragmatic view of love than, say, a male character like the Knight. You'd think the Knight going off and fighting in battles and living his life that way would be less romantic and more realistic, and that a woman, given the stereotypes of the day, would be more romantic and less realistic. But it's funny that the Wife of Bath is very, very unromantic and realistic in her view of love. Anyway, this is an excerpt from the Wife of Bath's prologue. When you see that word "from" there, it tells you that they're taking a little bit of it. The Wife of Bath's prologue is actually very long. She enjoys talking, and maybe that's one way Chaucer is making fun of female characters. Remember, it's a sexist time, and there's a lot of stuff in the Canterbury Tales that doesn't translate very well in terms of modern ideology and modern philosophy. Anyway, she's been talking to the pardoner about her 5 marriages, and she went through them, and essentially her first marriages didn't work out very well because her husbands were always trying to control her. And they were always afraid that she was going to cheat on them. And so they would do things like make her stay home and not let her have any money and not let her talk to anybody. And, this all translates pretty well to the modern age. And so she would talk about how, like, in return, she would pretend she was cheating on them, though she did. She would act like she was having affairs and flings because she felt abused that they didn't trust her, and so she wanted to make them feel bad in return. And a lot of her husbands were older men, and being suspicious and nervous and upset all the time, they had heart attacks and stuff and died. And so it went on this way until she met her last husband. I think his name was Johnny. And basically what happened in that one was he was a scholar, and so he loved reading books, and he particularly loved reading books that talked about the place of a woman and how she should be subservient to her husband. And he used to read her excerpts from these books to try and school or educate her. And finally, apparently, she got so mad that she beat him up and burned his books in front of him. And after that, he did whatever she said, and their marriage was perfect. And so the lesson that she pulls out of this is that in a perfect marriage, a man obeys the wife, not the other way around. And the partner gets very upset about this because, he's theoretically attached to the church and responsible for church doctrine, and that's not what the church says. And so he's going to respond, and we'll finish up this prologue before we start the tale. And I think that gives you enough of a sense of what the moral of her tale is going to be. Remember, in the partner's prologue, the partner told us the moral of his story was going to be radix malorum est cupiditas. There was no surprise there. And here, the wife of Bath is essentially telling us that she's going to tell us a story about love, and essentially the moral is going to be her own philosophy of love, which is that the woman should be in control of the relationship. So let's see what the partner has to say. From the wife of Bath's prologue. The partner started up, and thereupon, "Madam," he said, "by God and by St. John, that's a noble preaching no one could surpass. I was about to take a wife. Alas, am I to buy it on my flesh so dear? There'll be no marrying for me this year." "You wait," she said. "My story's not begun. You'll taste another brew before I've done. You'll find it doesn't taste as good as ale. And when I've finished telling you my tale of tribulation in the married life, in which I've been an expert as a wife, that is to say, myself have been the whip, so please yourself whether you want to sip at that same cask of marriage I shall broach." Now, this is a big old metaphor that marriage is like an alcoholic beverage, and has a bitter taste to it. "Be cautious before making the approach, for I'll give instances in more than 10. And those who won't be warned by other men shall suffer their correction." So Ptolemy has said in this connection. You read the Almagest, you'll find it there. Now, pause. One thing about Chaucer that, I guess is worth mentioning is that he loves to name drop. Chaucer's very well read, and his characters reference books. These are called allusions. We've talked about what allusions are multiple times, but he alludes to things that we don't read anymore. Nobody's read the Almagest. I can almost guarantee that. And so just assume that he's name dropping. He's showing how educated he is by dropping the names of famous scholars in the medieval age. But she does say here, and I think this bears study. She says, "I'll give instances in more than 10, and those who won't be warned by other men shall suffer their correction." So she's essentially saying, listen to other men. Do what your wife says. Let the woman be in charge of the relationship, or if you don't, she will cheat on you, and you will learn by watching other men who do what she says get her while you can't, right? And that's essential. This is a very sort of modern idea. It turns out that apparently women are still women, like no matter what century you're in. And this is something you're going to see, like when we read Othello by Shakespeare. This idea that when you treat people badly, they're gonna respond. If you assume she's cheating all the time, why wouldn't she just go and cheat on you? Like, why is she going to sit there and take it all the time and not, go and so this, I think, is sort of the idea that comes out of here. But the partner, of course, doesn't like that. "Madam, I put it to you as a prayer," the partner said. "Go on as you began. Tell us your tale. Spare not for any man. Instruct us younger men in your technique." "Gladly," she said, "if you will but let me speak. But still I hope the company won't reprove me, though I should speak as fantasy may move me. And please don't be offended at my views. They're really only offered to amuse. So there's Chaucer with his escape clause again. I'm just reporting what the wife of Bath said, and she wasn't even serious about it. She was just joking. So you can't get offended at what's in this story. He's always leaving himself a trapdoor or an exit. So this brings us to the wife of Bath's tale itself. She launches into her story, and I'm not going to read it in the wife of Bath voice because that would hurt me. I'm just going to read it in the regular narrator voice, but we'll see what we get out of this. When good King Arthur ruled in ancient days, a king that every Briton loves to praise, this was a land brimful of fairy folk. The elf queen and her courtiers joined and broke their elfin dance on many a green mead, or so was the opinion once, I read, hundreds of years ago in days of yore. Okay, so this beginning tells us, one, it's a King Arthur story, which tells us it's a medieval romance. It's going to involve knights and kings and queens and a test of love and all the kind of stuff that you would expect in a medieval romance. Also, the mention of elf queens and their courtiers tells us it's going to be a story that involves magic. There's magic coming in this story. So she set those two things up just here in the first couple of lines. Or so was the opinion once, I read, hundreds of years ago in days of yore. But no one now sees fairies anymore. For now, the saintly charity and prayer of holy friars seems to have purged the air. They search the countryside through field and stream as thick as motes that speckle a sunbeam. That's a nice simile for you. Blessing the halls, the chambers, kitchens, bowers, cities and boroughs, castles, courts, and towers, thorps, barns, stables, outlaws, and dairies. And that's the reason why there are no fairies. So, again, rewind. Part of the wife of Bath's prologue, she not only had an argument with the pardoner, but she had an argument with the friar, and she's getting back at the friar in her own story, and you can sort of see that. She's like, yeah, we don't have fairies and elves anymore because there's so many freaking friars everywhere. They blessed everything, and she goes through a list of what they blessed, and it's a gratuitous list, and it's supposed to be funny. They're blessing halls and chambers. That's fair. But then kitchens and bedrooms and cities and towns and castles and courts and towers and barns and stables and outhouses and dairies. I mean, like that's funny. Think of all the places. There's so many friars that they blessed everywhere in the world. So she's accusing the friars of being too plentiful. And that's the reason why there are no fairies. Wherever there used to walk an elf, today there walks a holy friar himself. As evening falls, or when the daylight springs, saying his matins and his holy things, walking his limit round from town to town. Women can now go safely up and down by every bush or under every tree. There is no other incubus but he. So there is really no one else to hurt you, and he will do no more than take your virtue. Wait, what? Like, cool, I guess, up until that last line. She's like, yeah, there's so many friars everywhere, and they blessed everything, and they're everywhere, and they made it safe. There are no more elves or things that are going to curse people as they walk around. Little girls and women can walk around freely now without worrying about Satan jumping up and getting them, because there's friars everywhere, and friars will never hurt anybody. They won't do anything to hurt you unless they take your virtue. Wait, what? She's suggesting that friars sometimes rape little girls? I think she is. That's a dangerous thing to say. But again, she was in an argument with the friar and she's trying to get at him. And of course, this is a stereotype of friars, that they're sort of like the milkmen of the time period. Anyway, now it so happened, I began to say, long, long ago in good King Arthur's day, there was a knight who was a lusty liver. So here's our main character being introduced. It's King Arthur's day. It's a knight. The only attribute we given about this knight is that he's lusty. In other words, he really likes the ladies. He's lustful. And lust is one of those 7 deadly sins. So take from that what you will. Who was a lusty liver. One day as he came riding from the river, he saw a maiden walking all forlorn, ahead of him alone as she was born. What do you think it means that a woman is walking? Forlorn means sad. She's alone. She's sad. And she's as she was born. That means she was naked, right? Like, so there's a sad, naked girl walking ahead of this knight. Now, in a medieval romance, the knight might be tempted by this, but he would rescue the woman because that's what knights do. But watch this knight. And of that maiden, in spite of all she said, by very force he took her maidenhead. So this knight sees this sad, naked girl. And instead of rescuing her, she's a maiden, by the way, which means she's a virgin. Instead of rescuing her, he rapes her, which is horrifying. I mean, that's the opposite of what a knight's supposed to do. And this is our indication right from the beginning that Chaucer is turning the genre of medieval romance on its head. A knight is supposed to resist temptation for a woman. He sees this naked, sad, crying girl, and instead of saving her, he's like, oh, I'm on that, and takes her virginity. This is horrifying and awful, but it doesn't seem like the narrator, the wife of Bath, is particularly upset about it. She doesn't seem to cry or be upset in any way. She's very matter of fact. And maybe this says something about knights in general and what people with power were like in the Middle Ages, and maybe people with power in general in the world. The code of chivalry was devised because that class had too much power and they needed to keep each other sort of in check, I think. But anyway, this act of violence made such a stir, so much petitioning to the king for her, that he condemned the knight to lose his head. By course of law, he was as good as dead. It seemed that then the statutes took that view, but that the queen and other ladies too implored the king to exercise his grace. So ceaselessly he gave the queen the case, and granted her his life. Then she could choose whether to show him mercy or refuse. So let's follow the plot here. Apparently the knight was found guilty of rape, and he was sentenced to death. He was going to have his head chopped off. But before that sentence could be carried out, Queen Guinevere, King Arthur's queen, begged King Arthur not to kill the knight, but instead to let her choose the knight's sentence for his crime, which is, again, another flip-flopping of societal norms. Instead of his fate being decided by a man, his fate is now decided by a woman, right? And so he's at the mercy of the queen. So the queen returned him thanks with all her might, and then she sent a summons to the knight at her convenience and expressed her will. This is the queen talking. You stand, for such is the position still, in no way certain of your life, said she. Yet you shall live if you can answer me, what is the thing that women most desire? Beware the axe and say as I require. If you can't answer on the moment, though, I will concede you this. You are to go a 12-month and a day, seek and learn sufficient answer, then you shall return. I shall take gages from you to extort surrender of your body to the court. So let's break this up and analyze it bit by bit. So the queen says, I can have you killed if I want to, but I won't if you can answer me a simple question. And the question is this: what is the thing that women most desire? What do women want? And of course, this is an age-old question that nobody can answer, probably because there is no such thing as what women want. Women are people, and people have diverse ideas and needs and whatever. But back to the actual story. Beware the axe and say as I require. So the idea here is he has to find out what it is that women want, come back and tell the queen. And if he fails, if he answers incorrectly, his head will get chopped off. And she's like, don't worry. If you can't answer it right now, if you don't know the answer, I'm going to give you a year and a day. Aha, it's a quest. Engage quest length. We saw the same quest length in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. A 12-month and a day to seek and learn sufficient answer, and then you shall return. But she has no illusions about this guy. This guy is a bad guy. He raped a girl. So instead of just letting him go, because he would just go and not come back, she's going to take gages from him to extort surrender of his body to the court. So he's going to get a year off, but she's going to throw his mom and his dad and his sister and whatever else in prison. She's going to confiscate all of his money and titles and lands. And if he doesn't return, she's going to execute them all. So he has to come back to Camelot, or else there's going to be problems for his family. And so that's how she's sort of making sure that he completes this deal. Anyway, sad was the knight and sorrowfully sighed, but there all other choices were denied. And in the end, he chose to go away and return after a year and a day, armed with such answer as there might be sent to him by God. He took his leave and went. Pause. No, God is not going to give a rapist an answer, but, there it is. He knocked at every, I went too far. He knocked at every house, searched every place. Yes, anywhere that offered hope of grace. What could it be that women wanted most? But all the same, he never touched a coast, country, or town in which there seemed to be any two people willing to agree. So he travels all over the place, and he asks every woman he can find what it is that women most want. And every woman gives a different answer. Very frustrating. Some said that women wanted wealth and treasure, money, right? Honor, said some. Jollity and pleasure. Some gorgeous clothes, and others fun in bed. To be often widows and remarried, said others again. And some that what most mattered was that we should be cosseted and flattered. That's very near the truth, it seems to me. A man can win us best with flattery. To dance attendance on us, make a fuss, ensnares us all, the best and worst of us. Some say the things we most desire are these: freedom to do exactly as we please, with no one to reprove our faults and lies, rather to have one call us good and wise. Truly, there's not a woman in 10 score who has a fault and someone rubs a sore, but she will kick if what he says is true. You try it out, and you will find so too. Pause. Now, this list isn't entirely done, but let's go back through it and look at the things that the women that this knight has talked to want. Are these things that women want? Money? Wealth? Sure. I think everybody wants wealth. Honor? Some people want to be treated with respect. I mean, we're going back to Aretha Franklin there. R-E-S-P-E-C-T, right? Some girls just want to have fun, right? Jollity and pleasure. Some gorgeous clothes. Some are interested in fashion. Some fun in bed. I feel like that's self-explanatory. I'm not going to go into that. To be oft widowed and remarried, that's a weird statement. Apparently they like diversity in their relationships. And back then you couldn't be divorced, so I guess that was the best way to do it. And some said that what most matters is that they should be cosseted and flattered. Some women just want to be told they're beautiful and that they're loved and treated that way. And she says that's very near the truth. That we're having the narrator break in here for a second. She's like, yeah, that's pretty true. A man can win us easily with flattery. They tell us these beautiful things about us, and we believe them. To dance attendance on us, make a fuss, and snares us all, the best and worst of us. But then it goes on and says some women desire freedom. We live in a very repressive society, and we want to be free. I buy that. Let's see, to be called good and wise. Some people want to be thought of as good women. And look at all the different answers here. How do we know what the real answer is? But then there's some really good wisdom here. Guys, pay attention to this one. It says, truly there's not this is line 115. Truly there's not a woman in 10 score, that's 200, who has a fault and someone rubs a sore, but she will kick if what he says is true. You try it out and you will find so too. So she ends this part of her narration. And of course, this is tricky to pause. I know this is narrated by the wife of Bath, who is a woman. So it's got a female narrator, but we know that the author's a man. So the author is a man pretending to be a woman. So we're not really getting a woman's views here. We're getting what Chaucer, a man, thinks a woman's views are. And it's important to keep that in your mind. But anyway, his idea here is that there's not one woman in 200 who has something wrong with her. And if a guy points it out, she's going to kick him in the nuts. People can't stand to hear true bad things about themselves. If you tell them something bad about themselves that's false, they can handle that because they know it's not true. But as soon as you point out something like if I had a lazy eye, if I was a woman with a lazy eye, Chaucer says, and you were like, hey, what's wrong with your eye? You're going to get kicked because you don't mention true negative things about people or they get upset about it. And I don't think it's just women. I think it's everybody. But there's an important lesson for you. Anyway, let's get back to it. We're on line 119 here. However vicious we may be within, we like to be thought of as wise and void of sin. Others assert we women find it sweet when we are thought dependable, discreet, and secret, firm of purpose and controlled, never betraying the things we are told. But that's not worth the handle of a rake. Women conceal a thing for heaven's sake. Remember Midas, will you hear a tale? All right. So here's Chaucer, I think, taking a shot at women. Some women like you to think that they can keep secrets, but women can't keep secrets. That's what Chaucer's saying here. And the wife of Bath's agreeing with him. And she's going to tell a story that underscores this point. We're going to have a story within a story here, something Shakespeare likes to do. But this is a big illusion. There was this Roman guy named Ovid who wrote a series of stories called the Metamorphoses. And these stories explained why things are the way they are. Like the story of Arachne. Most of you probably know that. There was a girl who was really good at weaving, and she was like, I'm so good at weaving, I'm better than Athena. And Athena comes down, she's like, Shazam! I'm Athena, let's have a contest. And the two of them have a contest, and in some versions Arachne wins, in others Athena wins. But whatever the case, Athena is so upset at Arachne that she turns her into a spider so she can weave the rest of her life forever. And this is why we have spiders. And so there's all kinds of stories like this that explain why things are the way they are. And we're going to get one of those stories. And according to the wife of Bath / Chaucer, it's going to explain why women can't keep secrets. So remember Midas? Will you hear the tale? Most of you do remember Midas, by the way. He's the guy with the golden touch, which is another of Ovid's stories. Among some other little things, now stale, Ovid relates that under his long hair, The unhappy Midas grew a splendid pair of ass's ears. As subtly as he might, he kept his foul deformity from sight. Save for his wife, there was not one that knew. He loved her best and trusted in her too. He begged her not to tell a living creature that he possessed so horrible a feature. And she swore, were all the world to win, she would not do such villainy and sin as saddle her husband with so foul a name. Besides, to speak would be to share the shame. Nevertheless, she thought she would have died, keeping the secret bottled up inside. It seemed to swell her heart, and she, no doubt, thought it was on the point of bursting out. Fearing to speak it to woman or man, down to a reedy marsh she quickly ran, and reached the sedge. Her heart was all on fire, and as a bittern bumbles in the mire, she whispered to the water near the ground, "Betray me not, O water, with thy sound. To thee alone I tell it. It appears my husband has a pair of ass's ears." Ah, my heart's well again, the secret's out. I could no longer keep it, not a doubt. And so you see, although we may hold fast a little while, it must come out at last. We can't keep secrets. As for Midas, well, read Ovid for his story. He will tell. So the story, she says, and this is one of Ovid's stories that Chaucer has rewritten in English, that King Midas had a giant pair of donkey ears, and he grew his hair really long to hide those ears. And he didn't want anybody to know that he had donkey ears, but you can't hide it from your wife. His wife knows that he has donkey ears, and she is not going to tell anybody because it would make her less powerful, and she'd be the woman who married a guy with ass's ears. And so she decides she's going to keep the secret forever. But because she's a woman, she can't keep the secret, and it's on the point of bursting out, and she has to tell somebody. So she runs down to the grass at the side of a river, and she whispers, "Midas has ass's ears," right? And she tells it, but then every time the wind blows through the grass, it whispers, "Midas has ass's ears." And this explains why wind blowing through grass makes a whispering sound. That's what Ovid is showing here. But what happens is, of course, everybody hears and everybody knows that Midas has ass's ears, and then the secret's out. And so this is the story she tells to underscore her point that women can't keep secrets. It doesn't matter at all to the plot, but it's kind of a fun little diversion. And now we're back to our story. Fearing to speak of it to woman, or I already read that. This knight that I'm telling you about perceived at last that he never would find out what it could be that women love the best. Faint was the soul within his sorrowful breast as home he went. He dared no longer stay. His year was up, and now it was the day. So part of the punishment that the queen gives him is that he's got to go talk to women. He's in a position where women are in a position of authority over him for a whole year. So he was in the ultimate position of authority over a woman with this rape. And then the queen is put in an ultimate position of authority over him, and she sends him out. And as opposed to wherever he sees a woman, him being the one who has the power, they have the power because they might have the answer to his question. And he has to ask them and listen. And now he's listening to all of these women, and he's talking to all of these women. And so you can sort of see the justice, the poetic justice of the punishment that she has levied on him. But of course, there is no answer to this question. So she sent him on an impossible task, right? And there's no answer that can be found. So he's going back now to die, very similar to Gawain. He's going to get his head chopped off by an axe because he has no answer to her question. As he rode home in a dejected mood, suddenly at the margin of a wood, he saw a dance upon the leafy floor of 24 ladies, nay, and more. Eagerly he approached and hoped to learn some words of wisdom ere he should return. But lo, before he came to where they were, dancers and dance all vanished into air. Ah, magic. He sees 24 young ladies dancing by the edge of the wood, and he rides over to hopefully ask them a question. And as he gets there, they all poof, vanish, and they're gone. So this is an indication to us that magic is happening in the story right now. There wasn't a living creature to be seen save one old woman crouched upon the green. And so when a bunch of young women disappear and there's just one old lady sitting there by herself, what are you supposed to think? I think maybe this is Morgan Le Fay, and maybe this knight is Gawain. It's possible. We never mention his name. We never mention her name, but this is an old witch, right? And she's sitting there on the green. A fouler-looking creature, I suppose, could scarcely be imagined. She arose, and now she's the ugliest-looking woman in the world. There is no uglier woman anywhere, and I think it says that. She arose and said, "Sir Knight, there's no way on from here. Tell me what you're looking for, my dear. For peradventure that were best for you. We old women know a thing or two." So she's like, "Hey, Sonny, I'm pretty old. I might know the answer to your question." Right. And so the knight, first time the knight speaks is right here. Dear mother, said the knight, alack the day, I am as good as dead if I can't say what thing it is that women most desire. If you could tell me, I would pay your hire. So he's like, hey, I'll pay you if you'll tell me what thing it is that women most desire. Give me your hand, she said, and swear to do whatever I shall next require of you, if so to do should lie within your might, and you shall know the answer before night. So she's like, I know the answer. Come on over here and promise me that whatever I ask, you'll do it. What does he have to lose, by the way? Like, he's going to get his head chopped off today. So if he agrees to this, maybe he saves his life. Upon my honor, he answered, I agree. There's that code of chivalry. Upon my honor. Now, how chivalrous can a guy be when he's a rapist? But whatever, he just puts his honor out there and decides to agree. And then, said the crone, I dare to guarantee your life is safe. I shall make good my claim. Upon my life, the queen will say the same. Show me the very proudest of them all, in costly cover chief or jeweled call, that dare say no to what I have to teach. Let us go forward without further speech. And then she crooned her gospel in his ear and told him to be glad and not to fear. So she whispers into his ear, and her old lady breath, washes across his face, and he finds the answer. What's funny is we don't know the answer. She whispers it to him. So as a reader, we don't know what the answer is. They came to court. This knight in full array stood forth and said, No, queen, I've kept my day and kept my word, and I have my answer ready. There sat the noble matrons and the heady young girls and the widows too, that have the grace of wisdom, all assembled in that place. And there the queen herself was throned to hear and judge his answer. Look at this. Instead of the court being full of knights and men, the queen is sitting on the king's throne, and the entire court is full of women who are standing here ready to judge him. The women are all in positions of authority, and he himself is the one who is, not. It all depends on whether he can satisfy them. Let's see. Then the knight drew near, and silence was commanded through the hall. Silence! The queen gave order that he should tell them all what thing it was that women wanted most. He stood not silent like a beast or post, but gave his answer with the ringing word of a man's voice. And the assembly heard, My liege and lady, in general, said he, a woman wants the self-same sovereignty over her husband as over her lover. And master him, he must not be above her. That is your greatest wish. Whether you kill or spare me, please yourself. I wait your will. So the knight's answer is pretty clever. He says, my lord and lady. He calls this lady his liege, his king. So he's giving her the authority that she's already given herself. He says a woman wants the sovereignty over her husband as over her lover. So a woman wants to be in charge of the relationship. A woman is in charge of the relationship when a man's courting her, because a lover is desperate to get a woman's affection and will do whatever he can to get it. And so he agrees with her and treats her well, but she wants that over her husband. She wants to be in charge of the relationship. She wants to have the keys to the car, metaphorically speaking. And she should master her husband. He must not be above her. That is her greatest wish. And then at the end of this, he says, whether you kill me or spare me, please yourself. I wait your will. So at the end of this, he's like, and I give you the power in this relationship. Kill me or spare me, it's your choice. He knows that's what she wants, and he gives it to her, even though she already has it. But it's important that from the man is coming this act of submission, or these words of submission. So is that what women want? To be in control? To have the power? Is that right? That's interesting. In all the court, not one shook her head or contradicted what the knight had said. Maid and wife and widow cried, he saved his life! So apparently that is the answer. Congratulations, he's won. And on the word up started the old wife, the one the knight saw sitting on the green, and cried, your mercy, sovereign lady queen! Before the court disperses, do me right. 'Twas I that taught the answer to the knight, for which he swore, and he pledged his honor to it, that the first thing I asked of him, he'd do it, so far as it should lie within his might. Before this court I ask you then, sir knight, to keep your word and take me for your wife. For well I know that I have saved your life. If this be false, deny it on your sword. So immediately, remember, she said, whatever I ask, you've got to do it. And what she asks is to marry him. Remember, he's like an 18-year-old knight, 20-year-old knight, young, attractive, powerful. And this is like an 85-year-old woman who's like, now you've got to marry me. And is this poetic justice for him being a rapist? Sure, on some level, I can see that. But you see how this is a flip of the tropes of medieval romance. Normally, it's a forbidden love. There's a knight who's in love with a woman that he shouldn't love, and he has to resist that temptation. Now it's not a forbidden love. It's it's him being in a relationship that he doesn't want to be in. He's trying to get out of this love. He doesn't want it, and yet it's being forced on him. It's the opposite of how a medieval romance usually goes. And Chaucer is doing this and having some fun with it, I think, at the same time. Alas, he said, "Oh, lady, by the Lord, I know indeed that such was my behest. But for God's love, think of a new request. Take all my goods, but leave my body free." It's interesting that the knight's like, "You don't touch me, hideous old woman. I'd rather you had my money and my land and everything. Just don't touch me." Says something about how guys view attraction. "A curse on us," she said, "if I agree. I may be foul, I may be poor and old, yet will not choose to be for all the gold that's bedded in the earth." I love how she uses the word bedded here. She means like all the gold that's embedded in the earth, but she's like, bedded, right? Because she's leading him to think in a particular direction. "That's bedded in the earth or lies above," again, lies above, "less than your wife, nay, than your very love." "My love," said he, "my heaven, my damnation. Alas, that any of my race and station should ever make so foul a misalliance." Yet in the end, his pleading and defiance all went for nothing. He was forced to wed. He takes his ancient wife and goes to bed. And we're at 36 minutes. I think that's a good place to cut this for the day. I hope you're enjoying the Wife of Bath's tale. We'll come back and we'll do more in a minute.